This story is simply about a nobleman who is reborn, aiming to live as a villain, but is mistaken for a saint. But before we delve into that, let's take a look at the protagonist's past life. It seems that from a young age, he always acted like a good person. He truly risked his life for a girl, but the only thing he received in return was not a word of thanks. Instead, he was treated with contempt and left to die. That's why, when he woke up in someone else's body, in another world, he couldn't forget the terrible life he had lived before. Those are all his memories of his past life. At that time, he died protecting his girlfriend, who betrayed him and caused his sacrifice, only to be reborn into a world of swords and magic. This time, he was reborn as Augur Verret, the eldest son of the infamous Verret ducal family. He seemed unable to comprehend that he had now become a villain, when all he had done before was help and sacrifice himself for others. However, upon closer reflection, he suddenly realized that being a villain was far better than being a hero. Anyway, he had experienced firsthand that being a good person didn't offer any real benefits. Not wanting to go through that again, he felt grateful that he had been reborn as the son of a wicked noble family. This time, whatever the reason, he will live his life his own way, live for what he wants. He will live according to his desires. This time, he will make sure every beautiful girl serves him and makes his slaves work hard day and night. And from today, Augur Verret, a 15-year-old boy, will begin his journey to become the absolute villain the world has never seen. Today, he was having lunch with his father, who was waiting for him at the table. As soon as Augur entered the room, he immediately apologized for being late. However, his father, Gordon Verret, didn't seem bothered by his anger because Augur had done very well in his training and studies. Not missing a single day, Gordon seemed very pleased that the heir to one of the 4 great ducal families was such a responsible and well-mannered person. And Augur is clearly one of those people. Gordon, a feudal lord, deliberately established a flawed administration and acted like a fool to lull his political rivals into a false sense of security while plotting behind the scenes. Because of this, in addition to his role as a father, Gordon is also a role model that Augur admires for his excellent bad behavior. That's why Augur will do everything to learn as much as possible from his father. And his father had very high expectations of him. Therefore, in order for Augur to become Gordon's successor, he had to enroll at Lisburg Academy of Magic. However, the question now is what Augur will do with his magic. It turns out that Augur possesses a unique technique, and because this is so rare in this world, he has decided not to reveal it to the public. Having made that decision, his father, Gordon, asked Augur to choose a personal servant to attend to him in the dormitory. Initially, Augur was somewhat hesitant in his choice, but when his father assured him that this was part of the training process to identify good talent, Augur couldn't contain his excitement. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, to find a talented henchman to assist him in his goal of becoming the perfect villain. However, talent alone is too boring. So, Augur decided to deliberately choose someone with a strong sense of justice, and then force her to commit evil deeds. This is how Augur envisioned things unfolding. The question is whether that is actually feasible. Augur already had someone he'd had his eye on for a long time. He decided to ask his father for permission and choose that person, beginning his search for his first accomplice. On the outskirts of the royal capital, in the underground arena of Walshua City, a talented girl with swordsmanship skills is easily defeating every opponent who comes her way. By using Frenzied Sword, she quickly cleared everything away in a matter of seconds. What was even more striking was that she maintained an indifferent expression. She showed no emotion after nearly killing half a dozen people. It seems this girl is the one Augur is targeting. After the bloody match, the arena organizer immediately called her out and announced that someone had come looking for her. When she entered the room, she was shocked to see that the person looking for her was a child. I don't know who Augur is. Chris felt confused until Augur stated her full name and rank. Former commander of the Knights of the Holy Cross, Chris Ragnica. Before Chris could react, she noticed the short sword beside Augur, bearing the Verret family crest. This proves Augur was a nobleman. Furthermore, Chris also began to remember that the Verret family was responsible for diplomacy and intelligence gathering. This led her to associate herself with nobles like Augur, who had slandered her and expelled her from the Order of the Holy Knights. All those bitter memories made Chris unable to control his anger and frustration the moment he saw Augur's face. This encounter brought back memories of something that had happened before. Back then, for the sake of justice, Chris had traced a major source of human trafficking. But when she discovered that the nobles were behind it all, she immediately tried to report the truth to the king. However, because the nobles held power and the ability to manipulate the king, Chris was falsely accused of lying and exiled to face punishment. Afterward, the nobles easily concealed all the evidence she had gathered about human trafficking. Furthermore, they turned her into a criminal in the eyes of the public. Because of that incident, everything Chris had worked so hard to build was taken away from her, including her position in the Order of the Holy Knights. Therefore, seeing a nobleman like Augur come to see her filled her with seething rage. The pent-up emotions in Chris could no longer be contained. She grabbed Augur's shirt and angrily demanded to know what he wanted from her. Chris poured out her heart, venting her bitterness, saying that it was because of nobles like Augur that she had to wield her sword, forged to protect justice in an arena rife with evil. Meanwhile, Augur remained indifferent, showing no emotion whatsoever. He showed no fear or anger. Instead, Augur seemed only disappointed with Chris. She felt that Augur had lost the pride of a holy knight. Augur's words shocked Chris. Emotions surged within her like a raging wave. But Augur reassured her that even though she felt she was no longer worthy of being a holy knight, he still admired her strength and determination. He reminded them that, as a knight, Chris had once inspired his friends to never flinch in the face of evil. She possesses a stronger sense of justice than anyone else. However, for Chris, regaining his confidence seemed incredibly difficult. She felt she was no longer the same person she used to be. She had to earn money through despicable means, no different from those in this arena. That's why she can't go back to being the person she once was, because the holy knight Chris Ragnica died long ago. However, instead of letting her give up, Augur encouraged Chris, telling her that this wasn't a reason to abandon her goals. He said that even if her old self was dead, it didn't mean she couldn't start over. With a reassuring look in his eyes, Augur extended his hand, inviting Chris to join him, promising to help her shine brightly once again. This was the first time a nobleman had come all the way here to make such an offer. This moved Chris deeply, and tears welled up in his eyes. Augur was very persuasive, and before long, Chris gave in. But Chris had no idea that it was all part of Augur's devious scheme. In his eyes, Chris was nothing more than a loser, a puppet easily manipulated at any time. On the way back to the capital, Augur told Chris that she needed to change both her attire and her name, because she was still perceived as a criminal by the public. Eventually, Augur gave her a new name, Alice. Once everything was arranged, just before leaving, Chris, now Alice, asked Augur for a favor. She wanted to visit the arena one last time, because she needed to prepare a few things before leaving. Initially, Augur thought that perhaps Chris had only wanted to come back to retrieve his weapon, but he was completely stunned when he witnessed Chris ruthlessly eliminate everyone in the arena, leaving no one alive. At that moment, Augur was certain he possessed the strongest pawn and had taken a major step towards his goal. However, he also realized that the path to becoming a villain was fraught with difficulties and obstacles right from the start. He knew he had to be cautious no matter the circumstances. Time passed, and Augur's enrollment day arrived at the Royal Lichberg Academy of Magic, considered the most prestigious magic academy in the country, exclusively for the children of the nobility. This is rumored to be the ideal location for Augur to lay the groundwork for his ambitions. That's why, on his first day of school, Augur made sure to arrive on time. Furthermore, with the powerful pawn named Alice, Augur felt confident that from today onwards, he would live his life to the fullest. Since Alice was Augur's chosen bodyguard, It was perfectly natural for her to accompany him on his first day of school. But as soon as Alice called Augur's name in front of the other students, the initial low murmurs began to grow louder. However, those rumors were not at all positive. Although the Verret family was famous throughout the kingdom, there was still prejudice that Augur relied solely on his family's reputation to achieve his goals. Some students even spoke ill of him behind his back, mocking Augur as a complete failure, saying that he must have used his family connections to get into the academy. These taunts nearly drove Alice to the brink of madness. In a fit of rage, she was almost ready to draw her sword and slash everyone. But before things escalated, Augur quickly intervened, restraining her and calming her down. At this point, Augur began to question his decision to choose Alice as his bodyguard, as she was clearly a dangerous person to have by his side. However, Augur also understood that criticism was something he had anticipated. Given the Verret family's notorious reputation, it was inevitable. Even so, it was undeniable that the excessive attention he was receiving was causing him trouble in one way or another. Now that he has Alice by his side, Augur's next goal is to build a harem. However, things didn't seem to be going well until a girl unexpectedly rushed up to him, trying to get his attention. Initially, Augur was completely confused and didn't know who the girl was. But after thinking for a while, he finally remembered. Her name is Karen Levitsenka, the only daughter of the Levitsenka family, one of the 4 most powerful ducal families in the kingdom. She is also Augur's former fiancée. It seems the last time they saw each other was when they were just 5 years old. This made Karen a little worried that Augur might not remember her. Since it was Karen and Alice's first meeting, Augur quickly introduced them both on the spot. After hearing everything Augur said, Alice still couldn't believe he had been engaged before. The fact that the engagement had been broken off due to an issue involving Augur was hard for her to accept, because in Alice's eyes, her master was a flawless person. However, it seems that even the most perfect person always has a flaw. And in this case, it's because Augur has absolutely no magical abilities. In a world where magic is the most important element, the fact that Augur, a nobleman, was unable to use magic was a fatal flaw. This caused Karen's family to gradually come to dislike Augur, viewing him as a disappointment. But for Karen, Augur will always hold a special place in her heart. However, she couldn't say that out loud. Instead, Karen simply smiled evasively and made an excuse about attending a matriculation ceremony to leave. After Karen left, Augur and Alice also hurried to the hall to attend the ceremony. However, almost everyone in the room was whispering and talking about Augur. The malicious gossip quickly enraged Alice, who nearly drew her sword and slaughtered all the chatterboxes. Fortunately, Augur calmed her down just seconds in time. Otherwise, the room might have turned into a sea of blood. Because of that small but calm act, Alice admired Augur even more. She remarked that despite being slandered, he remained composed and kind. Truly a wonderful person. But few knew that it was all just a charade. Augur had no desire to appear kind in the eyes of others. His true goal was to become the most dangerous villain in the kingdom. To achieve this, Augur needed everyone to underestimate him, to see him as nothing more than an insignificant nobody. That's why he let them gossip without reacting. But Augur swore that sooner or later he would make all of them pay dearly. After the matriculation ceremony, Augur began planning to recruit members for his harem. However, when Augur looked at the number of girls in the academy, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. However, as always, he had set his goal beforehand. This time, the target seems more difficult to find in this vast space. However, when he finally found her, she was being harassed by a group of bullies. To make sure he could reach her, Augur didn't hesitate to rush in to help, demonstrating his bravery. Luark Bombold, the second son of the Count of Bombold, was the ringleader of that bullying group. As soon as Augur introduced himself, Luark and his friends immediately fled, not forgetting to warn Augur that this wouldn't be the last time they'd see each other. After Luark's group had left, now it was time for Augur to find out why he wanted this girl to join his harem. It turned out the reason was simple. it was because of her figure, especially her prominent breasts. Their destructive powers stirred emotions within Augur, and that was exactly what he was looking for. However, Augur understood that he needed to remain calm and act like a gentleman. Otherwise, the girl might run away from him. To make his actions more convincing, Augur didn't hesitate to give the girl his handkerchief, and it seems that worked. The girl is now eager to see him again at the freshman welcome party. With everything seemingly going according to plan, Augur, the future villain, couldn't wait to take the next step in his game. Time passed, and after some preparation, the freshman welcome party at Leisberg Academy of Magic has finally begun. At the party, Augur immediately noticed a man surrounded by a group of young women. This made him wonder who this man was. It turned out that it was Prince Arnia Rondism, the heir to the throne, and he is also Karen's new fiancé. This information came as a shock to Alice, as she never imagined the Karen family could do something so terrible, canceling their daughter's engagement to Augur just so she could marry someone else. However, Augur seemed to have accepted his fate. As someone without magical abilities, he couldn't possibly fight for what he had once shared with Karen. Although Augur was very open and accepting of his fate, but it seems his maid, Alice, couldn't help but feel angry about what had happened. Her murderous aura was so intense that it caught the crown prince's attention. A commotion began to spread throughout the party, and Augur quickly intervened, introducing himself as Alice's companion. As soon as Augur entered, Prince Arnia seized the opportunity to humiliate Augur in front of everyone, calling him an unqualified student, incapable of magic. The prince's words nearly drove Alice mad. But before she could do anything to harm the prince, Augur quickly restrained her and stepped into the conversation himself. Despite being humiliated and ridiculed in front of everyone, Augur remained calm and composed. He thanked the prince for remembering his name even though he hadn't introduced himself, a sarcastic smile playing on his face. The prince continued to taunt him, saying there was nothing to worry about, as Augur was quite popular in the academy. But the situation between them became increasingly tense. Karen, witnessing this, tried to intervene to stop the confrontation. But since Prince Arnia is currently her fiancé, Karen can't act too forcefully. Otherwise, it will create a major problem for everyone. Finally, the prince decided to stop, ceasing his insults towards Augur. However, Augur still felt choked up, acutely aware of his helplessness in being unable to do anything to defend himself. However, Augur was still very grateful to Karen. Although she couldn't do much, she always tried her best to help him, even the smallest thing. Even though everyone had lost faith in him, Augur held onto his pride, because there was still one person who believed he possessed abilities far superior to anyone else. However, Augur's lack of magic is one of the biggest misunderstandings people have about him. Augur knows that one day, everyone will have to bow down before him and his power. But before that happened, Augur was even more excited to receive an unexpected love letter from Mashiro Liche, the ordinary girl with the striking figure whom he had rescued earlier. Mashiro seemed to want to tell him something, so she invited him to meet her the following day in the school's backyard. This made Augur extremely excited. The next day, just as Mashiro had expected, Augur arrived on time. As soon as he arrived, Mashiro immediately thanked him for saving her the day before. She didn't keep him waiting long either, quickly revealing the real reason she had called him to meet her. As they were about to enter the exciting part, Augur suddenly woke up. He realized that everything he had just seen was only a dream. However, Augur still hoped that dream could come true in the future. So, as soon as he woke up, he prepared for his big day. Before starting, Augur didn't expect Mashiro to send him a love letter so soon. Although he was confident that she would do it sooner or later, he didn't expect it to be on the very first day. This made Augur begin to wonder if Mashiro was truly a proactive girl, or perhaps she'd fallen in love with him at first sight. Whatever the reason, Augur now felt like a guilty man, just as he had always wanted to be. Meanwhile, as Augur prepared, Alice stood beside him, watching, almost unable to hold back tears at her master's amazing performance today, like a true and loyal fan. As soon as Augur was ready, He wasted no time and immediately went to the meeting place. As soon as he arrived, he immediately apologized to Mashiro for making her wait. However, Mashiro was very happy that Augur had arrived, and without hesitation, she immediately thanked him for saving her the day before. Hearing Mashiro say the exact same words as in his dream filled Augur with excitement, as if his own wishes were coming true. But he was surprised when Mashiro asked him to get involved with her anymore. It seemed Augur's presence made her feel awkward, so she only wanted to see him today to return the handkerchief and say these words. Augur couldn't help but feel conflicted, because yesterday Mashiro seemed so cheerful, but today she was pushing him away. Mashiro hastily explained that what happened yesterday was just a misunderstanding, leaving Augur completely stunned. Augur seemed to be having trouble believing that his chivalrous act the previous day had been ineffective, leaving him wondering what he had done wrong. Suddenly, Augur noticed Luark and his friends loitering around their meeting place. After a brief conversation, Augur was stunned to realize that Mashiro was actually Luark's friend. This meant that when he chased them away yesterday, the result was completely the opposite. In fact, Mashiro seems to prefer bad boys to refined gentlemen. At this point, although Augur was very surprised by what had happened, he just laughed self-deprecatingly. However, Mashiro felt quite disappointed in herself for saying those things to him, because deep down, she really wanted to be with Augur. Since it was already midday, Augur decided to stop by the cafeteria to grab something to eat. While eating, he began thinking about how to atone for his mistakes with Mashiro. After all, she was still one of his targets. While enjoying her coffee, Alice shared her thoughts, saying that she was also surprised that Mashiro would say such things to Augur. Even Alice had hoped that Mashiro would fall in love with her mistress at first sight, but it seemed that hadn't happened. However, Alice also noticed something strange. Mashiro's words made her think. Since Luark and his group were actually Mashiro's friends, it would be strange if she expressed gratitude to Augur after he had sent them away. Therefore, Alice speculated that there must be a reason why Mashiro acted that way. After some reflection, Augur finally understood Alice's meaning. However, even if their suspicions were correct, Augur still felt that now was not the time to act. All they need to do now is wait and see how things unfold. Alice, who thought Augur was just testing her abilities, decided to make finding the clue her goal and quickly handed it to him. Therefore, from now on, Alice has set herself the task of observing Mashiro carefully. Meanwhile, at the old academy building, Luark and his group were chatting and laughing together. It seems they were discussing what had happened between Augur and Mashiro earlier. They thought Augur had been tricked, believing that Mashiro had been kidnapped and forced to say those words to Augur. However, because Augur was someone she greatly admired, Mashiro mustered the courage to ask Luark why he did it without any remorse. Luark replied that he simply wanted to see Augur cry, regardless of the reason. And since Mashiro had started it all, Luark ordered her to call Augur again, because this time he intended to defeat Augur like a puppet. Even though Augur was powerful in taijutsu, Luark was confident that with his magic, he and his group would defeat Augur in an instant. Worried about Augur, Mashiro tried her best to stop Luark from continuing his wicked plan. It turned out that Mashiro only wanted to do what Luark and the others wanted, because she didn't want Augur to be hurt anymore, as that was the promise Luark had made to her. However, it seems they are no longer keeping that promise. At this point, Mashiro begins to realize that for the nobles and commoners like herself, they can easily discard her. However, what made her feel different was Augur. He always stood up for everyone, regardless of whether they were nobles or not. And for that reason, Mashiro decided to stand up and protect him, no matter what. She couldn't let Augur suffer alone. But this time, Luark had no choice but to humiliate Mashiro in front of everyone. He acted forcefully, tearing Mashiro's shirt apart, revealing her underwear. As he prepared to continue, the door of the old building was kicked open and Augur appeared. This startled Luark and his group. Seeing this, Luark and his friends who were preparing to act immediately turned to confront Augur. He called out, asking Augur what he was doing there. thinking that Augur would be crying because his heart was broken by Mashiro. But with a confident smile on his face, Augur replied that he never believed in such a charade, which angered Luark. At this point, Luark began to truly believe that Augur had seen through his plan, which only fueled his anger further. However, the truth is, just a few minutes ago, Augur was taking a deep breath. Lost in my thoughts, I wondered what I'd done wrong. He was too worried about what he had done, until Alice informed him that Mashiro was being harassed by Luark and his group through a magical camera. Thanks to the capabilities of this camera, Augur discovers that Mashiro's earlier statements were just a trick. She was forced to say them. Her true feelings were revealed in the words she spoke yesterday. This means Augur has to save her, no matter what. Instantly, his broken heart was mended by Mashiro's words. Although it was undeniable that his heart had been wounded before, the fact that he had regained his composure made this moment truly heroic. However, Luark wasn't worried at all. He thought that with his magical power, Augur would be defeated in a flash. Therefore, with absolute confidence, Luark did not hesitate to attack, use fire magic. But contrary to all expectations, Augur stopped him immediately. This left Luark bewildered. How did Augur manage to do that? Augur shouldn't be able to use magic because he doesn't possess any magical abilities. The only way Augur can win is to dispel his opponent's magic. Luark, who relentlessly attacked Augur from all directions, ultimately suffered a complete defeat. When he realized Augur was capable of this, he nearly fainted from fear. When Luark realized that this situation would be the end of him, he simply gave up, giving Augur the chance to land a powerful punch. With just one punch, Luark was knocked unconscious. Once the losers had been dealt with, Augur immediately went to Mashiro's side. He checked to see if she was all right while he draped his jacket over her. Mashiro, still stunned by what had just happened, finally mustered the courage to ask Augur, "What just happened? How did you make that magic disappear?" Augur explained that he had used the skill Delete, a technique he had developed over the years that could neutralize magic under certain conditions. Mashiro was worried that Augur would hate her and punish her for what she had done. However, Augur quickly reassured Mashiro that she had nothing to worry about. But as for the punishment, it seems Augur has something in mind. He only asked her to keep his technique a secret and not to cry anymore. Besides that, he also wanted her to ignore the words of those who said they were just failures, ordinary people who could achieve nothing in life. But above all, the greatest punishment Augur demanded was that she accompany him, stay by his side from now on. Without a moment's hesitation, Mashiro immediately agreed to Augur's offer, unable to contain herself as she hugged him tightly, expressing her profound gratitude. Meanwhile, Augur couldn't help but feel satisfied with this moment, especially since Mashiro's body was now in his hands, making him feel like he had taken another step in building his harem. His position was beginning to solidify, and Augur couldn't help but be excited about what was to come. Meanwhile, it seemed as though someone in the shadows was watching them closely. Seeing the three of them together made the woman feel excited about the interesting things that were about to happen this year. Following this unexpected event, Luark and his friends were expelled from school, which they fully deserved for the terrible things they had done. They will have to live under the label of pervert for the rest of their lives. This news was not only a dream come true for Mashiro, but also for Augur, because it meant he could focus on his daily work without worrying about taming those three. As the days went by, Augur became increasingly focused on his training, persistently practicing without rest. Alice, always by his side, did her best to support Augur as a personal attendant. She cared for him, added weight to his exercises, cooked for him, and constantly monitored his every move. Seeing her master's physique grow stronger, Alice was surprised, as she had always thought that nobles were physically weak. However, her master seemed to be an exception. Meanwhile, Augur was lost in thought, analyzing why he was different. Based on his analysis, most nobles were capable of using magic, but he, having been reincarnated, possessed none. Perhaps that was why he had such a powerful body, as a form of compensation. If that's true, then he needs to train the strength even more. In the middle of practice, Mashiro unexpectedly appeared and greeted him with a good morning. Seeing her appear filled Augur with excitement, as he had long dreamed of living with a childhood friend. That's why he had forbidden Mashiro from addressing him too formally, to maintain that intimate atmosphere. Hearing her call him Augur-kun was wonderful. Because Mashiro was here, Augur asked Alice to protect her whenever he couldn't be by her side, as he was still worried about her after what happened. After this was over, it seemed he had been called to meet someone important. So, Augur decided to take a shower first and prepare for that important meeting. After making all the necessary preparations, Augur immediately set off. On the top floor of the faculty building, Augur took a deep breath, feeling nervous before knocking on a huge door. This suggests that the person he is about to meet is extremely important. That person was none other than Floan Milfonti, the head mistress of the academy. No one in the world didn't know the name Floan, nicknamed Thunderstorm. She was a hero with a long and outstanding record. And although he had retired and taken on the position of principal, but no one sensed a decline in her power. The moment Augur entered the room, he sensed a wonderful aura and welcoming energy emanating from Floan. However, Augur couldn't help but feel nervous in her presence. Noticing Augur's tension, Principal Floan quickly reassured him that there was nothing to fear. She had only invited Augur to thank him for something. This made Augur curious about what she wanted to thank him for. And then he was surprised to hear Floan mention Mashiro Liche. Augur couldn't believe his ears when he heard this news. He never imagined that the principal would care so much about an ordinary person like Mashiro. It was unbelievable that she had summoned him directly just to express her gratitude for saving a commoner. This made him wonder, what exactly was her purpose? At that moment, Floan revealed information that completely stunned Augur. According to Headmaster Floan, in this world, each person possesses only one magical ability. However, there are exceptions, such as children born with the ability to use multiple magical abilities. Mashiro Liche is one such case. She possesses both wind and ice magic, a dual mage, making her an invaluable treasure. Floan observed and noticed that Augur was always paying attention to Mashiro. This made her appreciate his actions even more. As for Augur, he was still stunned by the fact that Mashiro was truly a rare talent. From the beginning, Augur had chosen Mashiro solely because of her bust size. He hadn't realized such crucial information, which made him question himself. Mashiro is a rare talent, and Augur felt relieved that she wasn't ruined by the previous incident. That is why Principal Floan thanked Augur for his help. After a brief conversation, Augur immediately set off because class was about to begin. On the way to class, he began to feel a conflict within himself. Although his path to becoming a villain was on the right track, with Alice as a warrior and Mashiro as a member of the harem, but Augur still felt something was off. He never imagined he'd be thanked when his goal was to become the most powerful villain. But unexpectedly, Principal Floan had a strange plan in mind. Floan had actually planned to use Mashiro Leech as a test subject, and Augur stole Mashiro from her. What Floan did was unacceptable, and things were now getting worse than he imagined. Not to mention Alice, his servant, someone Floan knew very well. Knowing Alice well, Floan realized she was a monster who had risen to the rank of commander of the Holy Knight solely through her dual swordsmanship and magic skills. But what worried Floan the most was what Luark had mentioned. It seemed that as soon as Luark and his friends were arrested for what they had done, he immediately talked about Augur erasing his magic. Hearing such revelations terrified Floan, as her powers depended solely on magic. However, unwilling to believe that such magic existed, Floan began to wonder what Augur was really up to. Unable to figure out his motives, she could only believe that Augur surely had some plan to become an obstacle to the dream Floan had pursued for so many years. However, proud of her title Floan's Lightning Strike, she wouldn't let anyone stand in her way, especially when she was so close to achieving her goal. Therefore, as a precautionary measure, she asked Reina Milfonti, a student at the academy, to monitor and supervise Augur. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Alice and Mashiro began to worry about Augur being later than usual. As they grew increasingly worried, Augur unexpectedly walked into the classroom, completely reassuring them both that he was fine. Both Alice and Mashiro breathed a sigh of relief. However, Augur still had many questions in his mind, especially why the headmaster had called him so early in the morning just to thank him. Does that mean she values Mashiro's magic so highly? Or is there another reason behind it? To find out the truth, Augur decides to skip class with Mashiro to test something to verify one's hypothesis. Although this action caused a commotion in the class, Augur didn't care, as he couldn't wait any longer for the answer. As soon as we left the classroom, Augur immediately led Mashiro to the training building. He wanted to see Mashiro's dual magic immediately. Without hesitation, Mashiro agreed to Augur's request. Excited to finally be able to show my stronger side to my teacher. When Mashiro tried to open the door by force, she unexpectedly tripped and fell to the ground. At that moment, Reina appeared and reminded them both that first-year students were not allowed into the training tower. Since neither Augur nor Mashiro knew her, Reina then introduced herself, saying that she was the president of the student council at Lichberg Academy of Magic. Hearing her name, Augur immediately recognized her as Flone's first disciple, the one known as the child favored by the gods. She was renowned not only within the academy, but also in society for her outstanding talent and beauty. However, what caught Augur's attention most was Reina's bust size, which was much larger than it appeared in the photos. He was so surprised that he didn't realize he had been staring for too long. That's why Reina felt compelled to speak up. She called him out seductively. She started teasing him playfully. Mashiro couldn't help but feel a little uneasy, but before she could react, Reina immediately cornered her, asking why they were both there. Without hesitation, Augur replied that because the class was so boring, they decided to practice on their own. After listening, Reina then suggested they take a practical course as a gesture of politeness. Knowing that Reina was an expert in this field, Augur couldn't let this opportunity slip away. After all, this was a rare chance, even if it meant spending a lot of money. This could be very useful for his research on eradicating. Therefore, without hesitation, Augur decided to accept Reina's offer. However, before anything could happen, Reina made her intentions clear, stating that she would only agree to help them on the condition that Augur joined the student council. In retrospect, Augur realized that the fact that she, known as Flone's lightning strike and Flone's apprentice, had approached him so repeatedly was very strange. This was clearly not a coincidence. In other words, it was a trap they had set. Reina is just pretending to be kind, but in reality, she wants to turn him into her pawn. Therefore, with a resolute attitude, Augur refused Reina's offer, publicly declaring that he had no intention of working under her or becoming anyone's henchman. Augur's refusal made Reina laugh, but the tension began to build. Luckily, Alice rushed in. To ease the tension, instead of trying to figure out if it was the right time to intervene, Alice rushed to Augur and asked why they had left her behind. With a forced smile, Augur indicated that he had just had a sudden urge to experiment with something. At that moment, Alice finally noticed Reina standing beside her. However, before Alice had a chance to get acquainted with her, Reina smiled and left, saying that she finally understood what Augur meant, but that she was still open to welcoming him anytime. If he changes his mind, she will always be there and waiting for him to contact her. As soon as Reina got back to the bathroom, she breathed a sigh of relief. Reina looked in the mirror and pondered to herself. She quickly wondered if what she was doing was enough to control a man. But on second thought, she knew that wouldn't work on the other women around him. Those things were just tricks. Her breasts are so large just for show. In reality, they're made of foam to create the illusion of being bigger. Even though her plan failed, Reina didn't want to give up. She was determined to catch him next time. Meanwhile, Augur was still wondering why Reina had given up so easily. But since everything seemed to be going smoothly for him, Augur decided not to think about it any further. Alice, on the other hand, remained puzzled as to why they had abandoned her. To avoid further questioning, Augur explained that the principal had told him Mashiro was a mage with dual magic, so he wanted to see her abilities. But they were simply interrupted by the student council president. Realizing Augur and Mashiro's plan, Alice quickly proposed a perfect solution. She mentioned that a friend of hers, a former holy knight, was now managing an orphanage. However, recently some villains had targeted the orphanage grounds, and she happened to receive a mission to drive them away. Alice thought this was a great opportunity to test Mashiro's magic, because the idea of helping an orphanage sounds quite reasonable. Augur was open to this idea. After all, children are the future workforce, and they are like treasures. Deep down, Augur thought that if he could make these children indebted to him, he would have a lifelong workforce. With that in mind, he readily agreed to Alice's plan, and Mashiro was also very excited to participate. Several days passed. Finally, the weekend has arrived. On the way to the orphanage, Augur asked Alice for more information about the place they were about to visit. According to Alice, it was a quiet city located outside the royal capital. Originally, it was a peaceful land without any disturbances. However, what surprised Augur was that this city was located next to Walshawa, the city with the famous amphitheater. From what Augur knew, the city of Walshawa was notorious for its arenas and poor security, leading him to wonder if someone had been negatively affected by this and caused the recent incident. However, the big question now is why they wanted to seize this land in the first place, because when Augur and the girls arrived and inspected it, there didn't seem to be anything of value there at all. Just as they were preparing to explore further, they happened to come across a woman being threatened by a group of men. Without hesitation, Augur immediately intervened, defeated the men in just a few seconds. Because this is too easy, he plans to ask them about the purpose of the incident and resolve it quickly. However, before he could speak, Alice interrupted, loudly declaring that he was the one who would bring the light. Punishing evil and dispelling darkness, a savior lives for justice. Although these words are quite heartwarming, but Augur couldn't help but feel embarrassed by Alice's actions. What puzzled Augur even more was the men's strange reaction to his actions. They seemed to sense that he had done something wrong, as if he had just told a terrible joke. Even the girl who was the victim of the bullying earlier was shocked. Suddenly, Augur realized that the girl was Alice's friend, so it was no surprise she wasn't an ordinary person. A former holy knight and a nun, they were both too straightforward and their career choices too obvious. However, this doesn't seem like the time to be thinking about these things, as he still has some bad guys to deal with. When a man attempted to attack him with a sword, Augur swiftly dodged the blow and showed no mercy to them. Alice also didn't forget to support her teacher as much as she could. In just a few minutes, they had defeated all the men without wasting too much time. As night fell, Mio finally introduced herself. When we arrived at the church, Mio informed Augur that she had consulted with Alice about the harassment at the orphanage and the harm they were suffering. However, she never expected a nobleman like Augur to actually visit the orphanage. Now that Augur was here, Mio couldn't help but admire his kindness and concern for the people. But she had no idea that this nobleman had ulterior motives behind his benevolent facade. Just then, the children finally came outside. Seeing them made Augur very happy. Deep down, he thought these children would be his future workforce. And since they had been assigned to call Alice by her new name, everything would go smoothly from here. Now, the only thing Augur needs to do is clearly establish the hierarchy between himself and the children right from the start. To ensure they perceived him as someone in authority, he introduced himself as the eldest son of the Duke of Verey and declared that these children belonged to him, that they had come to him for protection. Augur hoped the children would be afraid of him. However, the reaction was completely the opposite of what he expected. Instead of being afraid, the children looked at him as a weakling, and they even called him a child just like them. Furthermore, it seems that at this orphanage, the nobles were not at all welcome by the children. When things didn't go as Augur had planned, Alice realized what was happening and immediately asked everyone to play outside because they had some work to do. Meanwhile, Augur, who considered himself an adult, tried to control his anger. Because he still has work to finish and needs to focus, as soon as the children left, Alice immediately demanded that the arrested men, who were targeting the orphanage, reveal their reasons for doing so. Initially, they were unwilling to cooperate until Alice threatened to kill them. One of them eventually spoke up, saying they had only been ordered to do so by someone named Aliban. Upon hearing that name, Alice's expression immediately turned cold. She whispered, asking the man for the Aliban's address. As soon as we received the information, Alice immediately began planning an attack on the group's headquarters tomorrow. Meanwhile, Sister Mio was worried about the prize money she had prepared. The moment Augur saw it, he immediately reassured Sister Mio that he didn't need anything. Although Sister Mio insisted on raising more money, Augur merely gave her a menacing glance, emphasizing that he didn't need anything. Sensing Augur's reaction, Sister Mio began to think that perhaps the amount of money she had was too little. She told herself that since Augur was a member of the Vere family, giving him this amount of money would probably be an insult. But she had no idea that Augur did it out of politeness. As Augur prepared to leave the church, the children suddenly rushed in. One of them tried to kick Augur. But before the boy could act, Augur quickly grabbed it. This surprised the child because of Augur's power. At this point, the child began to realize that Augur was even cooler than they had imagined. Augur then reminded Sister Mio that he didn't need any reward. Instead of giving him the money, Augur wanted Sister Mio to use it to buy the children a good meal for the rest of the week. Upon hearing this, Sister Mio was deeply moved. Besides being kind and considerate, this was probably the first time the children had experienced such joy in a long time. Since the orphanage was targeted, they had lived in fear because of the daily screams. However, before Alice could tell Augur what she had learned about the enemy's leader, the Aliban, she realized that the Aliban were a remnant from her time at Arena. This means someone escaped from Alice's grasp that day. However, Alice was confident that she had eliminated everyone present. However, Alice overlooked a crucial detail. While rare, it's occasional for someone to get a day off. This means the Aliban must have had a day off at that time, given the circumstances. His goal was probably to build a new arena. He had lost his foothold, and perhaps for this reason he was aiming for a remote area, far from the royal capital. Because Alice had never confronted him, she didn't truly know the extent of Aliban's power. After hearing everything, Augur began to realize that it was all their fault. This means Mio is suffering because of them, and even so, she still tries to give Augur the few coins she has. It seems that the evil Augur is targeting isn't something as trivial as that. Therefore, Augur was determined to resolve this matter with everything he had in his power to restore his reputation. But before they attack the Aliban tomorrow, they need to rest. After dinner, Augur went straight to his room and prepared to get some sleep. As he was about to close his eyes, he suddenly felt something heavy on his body. When he looked up, he was astonished to realize it was Sister Mio. She is asking him to give her some love. He immediately asked Sister Mio what she was doing. Sister Mio, blushing with embarrassment, hesitantly replied that although she knew her actions were inappropriate, she still wanted Augur to teach her about love. Raised in such an environment and having such a job, Mio never knew or understood what love was. She worried that if she didn't know what love was, how could she wholeheartedly teach and love the children? It turned out that Mio had been abandoned by her parents when she was young and had never received love from anyone. With tears in her eyes, she confessed that she didn't understand love, and if she didn't understand it, how could she truly love and protect children? A superficial love would only lead to incidents like this. Therefore, she begged Augur to show her some compassion and teach her about love. However, after hearing everything she had just said, Augur made the decision not to grant Mio's request. Augur explained that he didn't want her to waste her innocence. Mio was simply trying to distract herself from her inner anxieties. Although Augur understood Mio's reasons, he couldn't bring himself to grant her request. In any case, Augur only likes women with large breasts, and it seems Mio isn't his type. Moreover, The time to provide the answer she is seeking has not yet come. Therefore, Augur reassured her that she would surely find the answer. She just needed to patiently wait for the right time. Afterward, Mio seemed to calm down once her issue was resolved. Finally, Augur had the space and time to rest for the night. The following morning, Alice and Mashiro, along with Augur, finally set off for the Aliban headquarters. Before leaving, Augur checked on Mashiro, who had been feeling unwell for the past few days. He asked her if she was all right. Mashiro smiled brightly and assured Augur that she was fine and everything was ready now. Augur decided to reconsider their plan before rushing in. They need to remember their original goal, to eliminate the Aliban group and test Mashiro's abilities. However, if Augur is honest with himself, Mashiro is just a member of Hira to him, so he doesn't count her as a warrior. But if she is truly a dual cultivating mage, then that's a different story. Therefore, before the battle, Augur told Mashiro what she should do to test her magic. She would fight the opposing group alone. However, Augur assured her that if things went wrong, he and Alice would immediately step in. Although this is a serious matter, Mashiro seems remarkably calm. In fact, she seemed very excited about this for some reason. After moving for a few minutes, finally, they reached the Aliban headquarters. As planned, Alice kicked the door open without hesitation. Not a second wasted. She then asked everyone if they were the group that had committed the bad deeds led by the Aliban. Since the Aliban were well known to everyone, Alice introduced herself as an acquaintance of the Aliban. However, instead of taking it seriously, people started laughing at her, as if she were joking. They even intended to play tricks on her until the Aliban appeared. He greeted Alice by her old name, Chris. And upon seeing Alice, the Aliban felt a wave of nostalgia, as they had once been fierce enemies in the arena. As Aliban's henchmen prepared to attack the three of them, Mashiro intervened. He demonstrated his ice wind magic. With just one blow, she defeated all her attackers. Witnessing this magic surprised Augur the most. He didn't expect Mashiro to be able to control ice magic so perfectly, combined with wind. The way she condenses ice magic to enhance her power is truly unique. Not everyone can compare to her, no matter how many people there are. After defeating everyone, Mashiro immediately asked Augur if she had his approval. Upon receiving his answer, Mashiro couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Augur then went on to say that what Mashiro had done exceeded his expectations. If Mashiro was that strong, could she have won the fight? Initially, Mashiro might not have thought this possible, but now, with Augur mentioning it, she truly realized the hidden strength within herself. However, it seems they were a little careless, as they narrowly avoided being attacked by the Aliban. Fortunately, Augur managed to dodge the attack just in time, but he couldn't deny that it was a very close fight, showing that the Aliban are indeed a formidable opponent with superior speed. Realizing this, Augur instructed Mashiro to use ice magic to freeze Aliban's feet. Once he was trapped, Augur would seize the opportunity to defeat him. Without a moment's hesitation, Augur and Mashiro coordinated their attack on Aliban, hoping to defeat him with a single blow. Mashiro did everything she could to make sure she seized the perfect opportunity. Although the Aliban was clearly very fast, luckily, thanks to the wind, she was able to determine her location. However, the magic cast reflexively only lasts for a moment, but it was enough for Augur to lunge forward. As Aliban fell to the ground, everyone was astonished by what had just happened. Alice, even Aliban, couldn't believe he'd been defeated by these kids. He used to be the undefeated champion in the arena. This is impossible! Therefore, he was determined to make these children pay the price, even if it means sacrificing oneself, drinking poison to grow. His body began to transform into a gigantic monster. Mashiro and even Augur couldn't believe their eyes. All that remained was one question. Would this be enough for the Aliban to defeat the three of them, or would this be the end for all three? It seems we'll find the answer soon. In the blink of an eye, the girl finally noticed the wound on Augur's face. This left both of them stunned. Alice immediately lunged forward, intending to punch Aliban to protect Augur. But before she could act, Augur has handled everything. When the Aliban finally fails, he began to reminisce about the times he had never lost a battle. He never considered the possibility of failure. But this time, someone like Augur defeated him. Instead of continuing the fight, Aliban decided to surrender to Augur. They acknowledged his strength and expressed their willingness to become Augur's subordinate. Although Augur had no plans to take on any male subordinates, he agreed to accept Aliban into his group, even allowing him to build an arena under his supervision. Alice was very surprised to hear this, because she never thought Augur would agree to this offer. It felt a little disheartening to learn that Augur had agreed to build the arena. Augur immediately explained that his decision had clear reasons. An arena where everyone is welcome is sure to be profitable. Augur's kind words moved both Aliban and Alice so much that they were willing to follow him for the rest of their lives. Following this unexpected event, the three of them immediately returned to the orphanage to inform Mio that everything was fine and she didn't need to worry anymore. Mio's joy made her burst into tears, to the point that the children thought Augur was treating her badly. When the children began to criticize Augur and strip him of his noble title, Mio felt ashamed for not being able to raise them better. She blamed herself, perhaps because she didn't know how to love. Meanwhile, the children, thinking that Augur was trying to steal Sister Mio's money, they decided to donate their toys to help Mio. Knowing that most nobles love treasure, the children gathered their own treasures and gave them to Augur. Seeing this scene softened Mio's heart. As everyone began to get emotional, Mio finally realized that what she was feeling was love. When their work was finally finished, Augur decided to return to the academy. But besides that, it seems he also plans to move Mio and the children to Vere territory. In fact, Augur had two main objectives. The first was to test Mishiro's abilities, and the second was to secure future employment. That is, the children, to solidify his dark path. He provided shelter and education for Mio and the children in the Vere territory. Additionally, he ordered the Aliban and others to gather criminals to serve as fighters in the arena. However, it seems only Augur thinks he's one step closer to becoming an absolute villain. Meanwhile, everyone else in the room sees him as a kind saint, ready to serve him for life. As the day progressed, in the corridors of the Royal Academy of Magic, Karen, the only daughter of the Levitsenka family and Augur's former fiancé, visited everyone. Just seeing her, everyone couldn't contain their excitement. As she walked down the hallway, every student tried to steal a glance, captivated by her presence. Although she was a girl, the students, including the boys, considered her very cool and interesting. Despite being the Crown Prince's fiancée, everyone felt comfortable around Karen, because she was both wonderful and kind. Unlike other nobles, who often appeared arrogant and conceited because of their position, this noble woman was very approachable and easy to get along with everyone. Because Karen and Augur had a past relationship, so it's understandable that she feels awkward every time she meets Augur again. A month had passed since the incident at the orphanage, and Augur and the girls had been living at the academy during that time. Many things had changed, and Mashiro was now completely familiar with the two of them. One day, Augur was surprised to see Mashiro's gym uniform. Because it was so revealing, she didn't realize that this had attracted the attention of the boys. Mashiro was always cheerful, seemingly very excited to participate in the magic training, which is why she had changed her clothes beforehand. When Mashiro mentioned her magic training, Augur seized the opportunity to remind her of something important. Augur reminded her that she shouldn't use ice magic during magic training, and that she needed to control her power. Mashiro was confused, seeing no reason to do so, so Augur explained that her magic was too powerful, and if people knew about it, she would become a target. Furthermore, she comes from a poor family, and she feels a little guilty because her parents have to pay for her tuition. Therefore, she needs to graduate with high grades and find a good job. Upon hearing Mashiro's words, Augur was somewhat surprised, but also deeply moved. Augur reassured her, telling her not to worry anymore, as he promised to always take care of her. This made Mashiro feel a little awkward. But unexpectedly, someone was secretly listening to their conversation from behind. It turned out that Karen, the only daughter of the Leversenka family, had been eavesdropping all along. She couldn't help but feel envious because Augur had only been at the academy for a short time and already had two lovely girls by his side. Overwhelmed by jealousy, Karen finally decided to step out of the shadows, much to the surprise of Augur and the other girls. It seemed Karen hadn't intended to show up, but her body inadvertently revealed itself. Knowing their history, Augur was surprised that Karen was the one to speak first. In fact, it was rare for her to initiate a greeting, especially knowing that her father would be furious if he found out. Immediately, Karen explained that she had only come to say hello as a matter of course. Although she tried to remain calm when Mashiro accidentally touched her, Karen couldn't hide her panic. She told herself she needed to behave properly as a member of the Leversenka family. So she tried to regain her composure and introduce herself formally. This was Karen and Mashiro's first official meeting, so Karen took the opportunity to apologize to Mashiro for what the Bombold family had done to her previously, even though they were on her side. The way Karen treated Mashiro made Augur feel a little more at ease. After what Karen said, Augur concluded that perhaps this was why Karen greeted them, to apologize to Mashiro. However, it seems Karen had another purpose. She wanted to meet Augur because President Milfanti had a message for him. It seems Milfanti hasn't given up on inviting Augur to join the student council. However, nothing seems likely to change Augur's mind. But now that Karen had brought it up, Augur couldn't help but ask her if she should join the student council. As expected, Karen also joined the group, and she was always ready to help anyone she could. After all, that was the real reason Karen wanted Augur to join the student council, so she could see him every day. However, since Augur had no intention of doing so, he immediately asserted that he had already made up his mind and had spoken to Milfanti about it. Furthermore, Karen is the crown prince's fiancée, so she needs to be very self-aware. Anyway, seeing them together only causes trouble. Hearing Augur say that, Karen felt heartbroken, but she tried to hide her true feelings and finally said goodbye to the group. However, to make her feel a little more comfortable, Augur said that he would be happy to see her again. This made Karen blush and feel happy. The following day and the days after, Karen tried her best to meet the three of them. Although she tried to act innocent, Augur knew perfectly well that she was doing it on purpose. As time went on, Augur finally realized how Karen was constantly approaching him. Thinking back, he realized she had never done that before. It seemed Karen had invited them to lunch, but upon realizing she had had too much, she eventually withdrew the invitation. Meanwhile, at the cafeteria, Augur happened to see the prince chatting with many girls. Augur didn't really expect to see Arnia here, as he thought Arnia would be eating with Karen. In addition, Karen appeared to be dressed as a boy, something Mashiro noticed. When Augur thought it through, Karen is the only child of the Levantseka family. The current couple of this family unfortunately have no children other than Karen. However, since only sons are allowed to inherit the Levantseka family fortune, they were forced to raise Karen as a son. But a year ago, Karen was chosen by the king to be the fiancée of Crown Prince Arnia. The reason was that Karen was considered the most suitable female heir among the four major families. Karen, who had to behave as a boy her entire life, couldn't dress like a woman. This might explain why most of her outfits are anything but feminine. Since this marriage was decided by the king, it is highly likely that Crown Prince Arnia has no interest whatsoever in Karen. That's why he was still free to chat with many other girls. Even though he knew he had a fiancée, the Crown Prince still allowed Karen to continue dressing as a boy. After realizing that the Crown Prince had his own harem and seeing so many girls surrounding him, Augur couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Luckily, Mashiro was there to help him calm down. Indeed, Mashiro is not only cute, but also has a curvy figure, yet she also seems to be the serious type. Mashiro doesn't seem to like seeing men surrounded by many women. She couldn't quite understand where the joy lay in this, and since Augur was a man, Mashiro couldn't help but seriously ask him if he had ever dreamed of something like that. With Mashiro's sharp gaze, Augur couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Fortunately, Alice arrived just in time to ease the tension. After a brief, serious conversation, the group returned to casual conversation. When Alice returned after finishing her work, she brought back a dish for Mashiro to try. Watching Mashiro eat the hamburger, Augur couldn't help but recall what had happened earlier. It seemed that at this moment, Augur finally realized how terrifying Mashiro looked when she was angry. Therefore, from now on, he had to be careful about what he said in front of her, lest he be put in a difficult position again. However, he also had to admit that he found Mashiro's jealousy adorable. After careful consideration, Augur finally understood why Karen had approached him. Based on my speculation, Karen must have wanted to make the crown prince jealous. Therefore, she tried to take advantage of him. However, Augur had no idea that Karen did this because she still had feelings for him. Although unaware of it, Augur seemed ready to play the game he had devised in his head, determined to confront Karen and the crown prince. Before we delve into this issue, let's take a look back at Augur and Karen's lives 10 years ago. Karen and Augur used to be very close. At one event, Karen ran away from everyone and hid in the garden, sobbing alone. Meanwhile, Augur decided to search for Karen everywhere, and when he finally had the chance to talk to her, he immediately reassured her that everything would be all right. He also tried to make her feel better, especially when Karen was scolded by her father again. Since she was little, Karen had always thought of herself as a failure, a bad child. In reality, all she did was obey her parents. Realizing that it must have been incredibly difficult for Karen to endure such pain every day, that night, Augur decided to make her feel special by giving her a beautiful hairpin. He said he thought it would go very well with Karen's beautiful hair. Augur used the brooch as a symbol that no matter what challenges Karen faced, he would always be there for her, even when he wasn't physically present. From that day on, Karen saw Augur as her hero, the one who brought justice. She never imagined that a child like Augur could save a crybaby like herself. That's why she was surprised when she learned that their engagement was canceled because her father discovered Augur had no magical abilities. Karen nearly fainted from shock, even though she was already starting to feel something for Augur. As a vulnerable child, Karen had no power to oppose her father. She couldn't object when he annulled her engagement to Augur or when he compelled her to live according to his strict expectations. She was aware that she had hurt Augur and always felt guilty about it. That was an undeniable truth. Even though she wanted to mend their relationship, she knew Augur would never treat her the same way until some miraculous change occurred in him. After lunch in the cafeteria, Augur immediately searched for Karen everywhere. When he finally spotted her, he started a conversation, just as planned. Karen felt very embarrassed when Augur unexpectedly complimented her, calling her beautiful. Augur even said that Karen shone brightly like the sun. This was such a rare occurrence that Karen wondered if she was dreaming. As Augur drew closer and closer, Karen nearly fainted from tension. The air between them grew increasingly suffocating. Karen felt breathless, while Augur continued to compliment her with genuine admiration, saying her dreamy expression was adorable. After Augur caught Karen off guard, he continued on his way, smiling and telling Karen he would see her again in class. Mashiro, finding Augur's behavior rather strange, asked his master what he was up to. Augur immediately shared his suspicions with the two, believing Karen was using him to make the crown prince jealous. However, thinking he was 2 steps ahead of everyone else, Augur decided not to stand idly by and be manipulated. Even though Karen wasn't actually using him, Augur decided to retaliate by pursuing her. He thought Karen would be truly flustered when the man she was trying to manipulate started to fall for her. With that in mind, Augur was determined to pursue her persistently, believing that eventually Karen would feel uncomfortable when she couldn't control the situation. This is a battle that doesn't exist, but Augur is determined to win at all costs. And that's exactly right. Augur never stopped praising Karen. This made the poor girl feel uneasy every day. Before long, other students began hearing rumors about Karen and Augur's relationship. While other students were buzzing about the rumors, Karen didn't care at all. all she could think about right now was Augur. The man she secretly admired constantly praised her enthusiastically. She was a hopelessly romantic girl. Karen began to believe that Augur might have similar feelings to hers. Unbeknownst to her, it was all part of Augur's plan. Lost in her fantasies, Karen began dreaming of marrying Augur. About the honeymoon and the number of children they will raise. Without the assistant's intervention, Karen would probably have remained lost in her daydreams forever. However, when she was informed about the dinner scheduled with Prince Arnia, reality pulled her back. After some preparation, Karen immediately went to the meeting place. The prince was waiting for her there, his face filled with anger. When Karen apologized for being late, the prince's expression suddenly changed. After Karen sat down, the prince shamelessly demanded that Karen give him 5 gold coins. She was shocked, because only recently had she given money to the prince. With an arrogant tone and an overbearing demand, the prince went on to explain that he had spent all the money and now needed more. He also said that his father, the king of the kingdom, was a stubborn man who never gave him money. The prince felt resentful at having to live in such circumstances, unable to understand the lives of ordinary people. Therefore, he couldn't ask anyone else for money besides Karen. The prince instructed Karen to ask her father if she didn't have money, but Karen's relationship with her father was very bad. Her father only saw her as the prince's fiancée and considered her to have no value beyond that status. If her father knew she was being asked for money, she would surely be beaten like she was when she was a child, without any mercy. The prince showed no remorse whatsoever, and even warned her that she needed the money by next week. Before leaving, he insulted Karen further. He said that he had never noticed her dressing like a man because he didn't care, but lately, every time he saw her, he felt uneasy. And now he's found the reason. It's Karen's red hair. With a sarcastic tone, the prince even suggested that if she liked dressing like a man so much, she should just cut off her hair so she would look like a real man. Those harsh words tore Karen's heart apart. For a moment, she began to ask herself, why did she keep her hair this long? Perhaps it's because she still regrets something. For all these years, deep down, Karen always longed to be free from the cloth binding her chest, to wear a pretty dress and a cute school uniform like any other normal girl. But the more Karen thought about it, the more she realized she had known the answer for a long time. That's because Augur once said her hair was beautiful. That single compliment was enough reason for her to cherish it for all these years. Those beautiful memories flooded back, causing Karen to burst into tears. Amidst the immense pressure and cruelty of life, she suddenly remembered what had kept her strong until now. Without it, her precious long hair would probably have been cut off long ago. Meanwhile, Augur happened to meet Milfonti on his way home. The first thing he noticed, though he didn't want to pay attention to it, was the fake pair of breasts the girl was wearing today. However, that wasn't the main point of the conversation. Milfonti immediately got straight to the point. She brought up the recent rumors about Augur being around Karen and asked when he last saw her. Augur quickly replied that he hadn't seen Karen since their conversation before lunch. But this struck Milfonti as strange. As far as she knew, the student council meeting had taken place earlier, and Karen was absent without prior notice, something that had never happened before. Karen's unusual absence worried Milfonti, making him fear that something bad might have happened. Therefore, she asked Augur to help search for Karen on the academy grounds. While searching everywhere, Milfonti told Augur about Prince Arnia's cruelty towards Karen. However, at this point, Augur still thought Milfonti was exaggerating things. He had no idea that the truth was far more serious than just the prince's apparent lack of interest in his fiancée. Milfonti later revealed that Prince Arnia was pressuring Karen to pay a large sum of money. He exploited his position to make unreasonable demands. The prince seemed to find pleasure in tormenting Karen, making her suffer in silence. Milfonti also shared that everyone noticed Augur treating Karen differently in the past few days. Therefore, she speculated that Augur was doing this because he wanted to protect Karen by being by her side. Hearing this, Augur was stunned and deeply shocked. Finally, he realized that Karen had never intended to use him to provoke the prince as he had thought. The truth is, he completely misunderstood her. However, a new worry arose for Augur. His harem plan might fall apart if the daughter of a ducal family actually fell in love with him. Therefore, Augur resolved to rectify any misunderstandings as soon as possible. To resolve the issue, Augur asked Milfanti to stay at the student council office while he went to find Karen himself. He promised to personally bring her there. After a while of searching, finally, he found Karen crying alone inside a closet. Karen was a little surprised that Augur was able to find her, but Augur quickly explained that he knew Karen's habit from childhood. She always hid in the closet whenever she was sad. Hearing this, Karen was suddenly overcome with emotion, and tears streamed down her face. She felt that she was still immature, still the same weak girl she used to be. When Karen began to express her disappointment in herself, Augur reassured her that he didn't mind at all. To him, they were still childhood friends. And Karen didn't need to pretend to be strong in front of him. Augur was confident that talking about their childhood friendship would make Karen understand that she had no chance with him. However, he had no idea that these words had made Karen's feelings for him stronger than ever. After a brief conversation, true to his promise, Augur escorted Karen to the student council office without anyone seeing them. Upon arriving, Karen immediately bowed and apologized to Milfanti. He expressed his willingness to accept any punishment for his absence. Now, both of them are there, taking advantage of the opportunity. Milfanti raised a crucial question. What should they do with Prince Arnia? Augur personally wanted the prince to change and treat Karen kindly once again, but he couldn't bring himself to punish the prince the way he had punished Luark. At that moment, Milfanti made an unexpected offer that involves challenging the crown prince through a duel system. This proposal stunned both Augur and Karen. According to Academy rules, if two sides have a dispute, they can hold a public duel in front of all students, and the winner will determine which side is deemed right. This means Augur can openly confront the crown prince. Initially, Karen thought she would be the only one to face Arnia, but Augur unexpectedly stepped forward, asserting that he would do this for Karen. As expected, Karen was incredibly surprised to see Augur willing to do anything for her, even knowing that it could be dangerous. However, before things continued, Milfanti reminded everyone of an important rule in the dueling system. For decades, the loser has had to fulfill a demand from the winner, whatever that may be. The question is Augur still willing to participate? Without hesitation, Augur calmly reassured Karen that he had absolutely no qualms about challenging Prince Arnia to a duel. At that moment, Karen could no longer hold back her emotions. The fact that Augur was willing to risk everything for her brought tears to her eyes. But Karen had no idea that deep down, Augur had a perfect plan. There was no way he would let Karen handle this alone. For Augur, this was a perfect opportunity to both defeat the crown prince and force him to change his ways, while also shattering Arnia's arrogance. In other words, this was Augur's killing two birds with one stone plan. With Augur accepting the challenge, Milfanti quickly finalized the decision. The only thing she needed to do now was obtain the approval of Prince Arnia. For now, Augur and Karen could return to their rooms to rest, while Milfanti would inform them of the exact time and location of the duel once everything was arranged. However, Karen suddenly felt dizzy. Perhaps due to the exhaustion and stress of the day, she involuntarily fell into Augur's arms, creating a scene straight out of a telenovela. Milfanti, who couldn't stand any cheesy romantic situations, forced a smile and hastily dismissed them from the office with an annoyed wave of his hand. After things calmed down, Milfanti was left alone, unable to hide her excitement about the upcoming match. To be honest, Milfanti hadn't expected Augur to act exactly as she had hoped. She wondered if this was her chance to witness the legendary magic annihilation spell that Bombold had told the headmaster about. Milfanti was eager to see how Augur would fare against Prince Arnia, who possessed formidable magical powers. But above all, What Milfanti found most fascinating was Augur's innocent eyes when he decided to accept the fight. She didn't understand why, but when she saw that sincere and righteous look in his eyes, Milfanti's heart involuntarily began to race. Despite her outwardly strong and decisive demeanor, Milfanti harbors a completely different side, a side she never reveals to others. The following day, when the official announcement about the match between Augur and Prince Arnia was posted on the bulletin board, the entire academy was astonished and thrilled. No one expected Augur to dare challenge the crown prince. Even Augur himself was surprised to learn how quickly Milfanti had managed to gain Arnia's approval. With news spreading throughout the academy, Mashiro, who was known to be close to Augur, couldn't escape the attention of the school paparazzi. Everyone seemed curious to know more details and took advantage of Mashiro's attractive figure to take pictures. As Mashiro began to feel uncomfortable under the prying eyes of the crowd, Alice immediately appeared and coldly declared, "Get out of here before you have a chance of survival." Fortunately, that sharp threat worked, and things went pretty well. As soon as the students left, Augur thanked Mashiro and Alice for helping him. However, Mashiro was still reeling from the news of the match. She couldn't believe that Augur had been caught up in such a dangerous and serious situation. Seeing Mashiro begin to worry, Augur quickly reassured both her and Alice. "Everything will be all right. There's nothing to worry about." As Mashiro unconsciously wrapped her arms tightly around Augur in her panic, a thought flashed through Augur's mind. Although things didn't turn out this way, it seems that Mashiro's positive feelings towards him, which had previously declined, are now clearly increasing, and that's good news. Seeing Augur's calm and confident demeanor, Alice and Mashiro finally calmed down. They even promised to cheer him on in the upcoming match and give him their full support. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Augur decided to sit down and discuss his plan for the upcoming match with both of them. Once the three of them finally reached a more secluded area of the campus, Augur began discussing the details of his plan. He revealed that his main goal was to defeat Prince Arnia, force him to change his ways, and treat Karen better. Augur proudly called this the birth of a new prince. Excited and brimming with confidence, Augur eagerly prepared for the match. But surprisingly, Prince Arnia suddenly appeared at the old building where they were standing. Upon entering, Prince Arnia came face to face with Augur. Although Augur maintained a respectful and polite attitude when thanking them for accepting the challenge, Prince Arnia's sky-high ego couldn't tolerate the fact that someone considered a failure like Augur dared to challenge him. However, since things had come to this point, Arnia couldn't afford to look like a loser. To ensure the situation was in his favor, he abruptly reversed the course of events. They changed the title of the match and declared that they would fight for Karen's love. Reading this dramatic and absurd headline, Augur was completely stunned, speechless with shock. Before leaving, Prince Arnia smugly asserted that he would never have accepted a challenge from someone like Augur unless there was a more interesting reason. That's why he used Karen to spice up this fight. Now, he has transformed himself into a righteous hero, willing to sacrifice himself for his fiancée, and it even offered a chance to attract more admiration from the schoolgirls. The match was scheduled for the day after tomorrow, and Prince Arnia quickly made all the arrangement. This scheme infuriated Augur. Deep down, he thought to himself that this person had an absolutely terrible personality. Augur even doubted whether Prince Arnia had truly reformed after losing the match. Worse still, it seems Prince Arnia has his eye on Alice and Mashiro, who are always by Augur's side. But before he could utter any provocative words, Augur immediately refuted them. He wouldn't let the two of them leave him so easily. Augur said it with conviction, because he truly cherished Alice and Mashiro more than anything. Being a predator, Prince Arnia planned to take Alice by force. But little did he know, that very intention is tantamount to signing a life sentence. Before Prince Arnia could even touch Alice, Augur stopped him immediately with a murderous look in his eyes. He sternly warned Arnia never to lay a hand on Alice and Mashiro, or he would be the one facing consequences. Seeing Augur's deadly serious expression, Prince Arnia had to calm the situation. pretending it was all just a harmless joke and reprimanding Augur for being overly protective of the two girls. Although he didn't dare go any further with his plan, Arnia arrogantly declared that, one way or another, after the match, the two girls would belong to him. After that tense moment, Prince Arnia departed, not forgetting to throw back a remark that he was very much looking forward to the upcoming match. Even after Arnia's figure disappeared, the heavy atmosphere lingered, as the murderous aura emanating from Alice had not diminished at all. Deep down, Augur thought to himself that although he only wanted to resolve things peacefully, that arrogant prince had dared to walk straight into the line of fire. Fortunately, he had stopped him in time. Otherwise, he probably would have been dead long ago. Because she was so stressed by what had just happened, Mashiro couldn't help but lean close to Augur for a sense of security, an action that Augur greatly enjoyed. Meanwhile, Alice couldn't stop worrying at the thought of someone like Prince Arnia becoming king in the future. She wondered what kind of upbringing the king had given his son to turn him into such a terrible person. Based on the information Alice had gathered, Prince Arnia was notorious for frequently skipping school. His true strength, including his magical abilities and attributes, remained a mystery. But no matter how depraved he was still royalty, meaning he had inherited powerful magic from his lineage. Thinking of this, Alice was genuinely curious about what Augur was planning to do to deal with such a formidable opponent. Although Augur seemed to have no plan whatsoever, it turned out he had prepared in advance. To explain things more clearly to Alice, Augur decided to take her to the training tower. However, this building is off-limits to first-year students. But Augur had anticipated everything and had the key ready in his hand. It turned out Milfanti had lent it to him the night before. Before he and Karen left the student council office, Milfanti gave Augur the key to the training tower, allowing him to use it for training for 2 days before the match. Additionally, both he and Mashiro were allowed to be absent from class if they wanted to focus on training. At first, Augur hesitated. Sneaking into the tower felt like he was doing something illegal. Moreover, he wasn't sure if entering the tower without permission from the leadership was really okay. However, Milfanti quickly reassured him that there was no need to worry. As the president of the Student Council of Lichberg Academy of Magic, she was the highest authority Augur would ever meet. Therefore, she had every right to decide this matter. Given Milfanti's confident assurance, Augur finally agreed to the proposal. That's why Augur and the two girls are at the training tower today. Upon entering, all three were stunned by the magnificent and wondrous beauty of the place. But the question now was, what would they do here? It seems Augur is trying to defeat a mage without using Delete, his special ability. Because the upcoming match would be witnessed by all the students in the school, Augur knew he couldn't just use Delete indiscriminately, something Milfanti was hoping to see. But it seemed Augur had anticipated everything. To carry out his plan, he first needed Mashiro's help. Augur asked Mashiro to use ice magic to create snow, and she quickly put it into action immediately. The moments when Mashiro performed her magic always left Augur in awe and admiration. However, deep down, he couldn't help but feel sad and frustrated that he had inadvertently made Alice and Mashiro a condition in the match. Nevertheless, Augur quickly reassured them both, assuring them that he would win and protect them to the very end. Upon hearing Augur's determined words, coupled with his confident demeanor and muscular physique, Alice and Mashiro couldn't help but become flustered and blush. At this point, Augur decided to meditate, a technique he had long considered experimenting with. It seems he conducted his research based on the hypothesis that enemy magic could be neutralized. Therefore, Augur has very little practical experience with magic compared to ordinary mages, as he always neutralizes opponents' spells before they even have a chance to experience them. However, in the upcoming battle where he cannot use Delete, Augur will need to fight by sensing magic through his body. This means that for the next 2 days, he will have to expose himself to Mashiro's ice magic to train and familiarize himself with it. Mashiro immediately worried that this might cause Augur to catch a cold. But Alice quickly reassured her, assuring her that there was no need to worry because she knew Augur would be fine, simply because this kind of physical training was inherently characteristic of Augur. Upon hearing Augur mention this, Mashiro began to recall her childhood memories. Compared to others, she had grown up with magical experiences, and she understood that lacking such experiences would be a significant disadvantage for a mage. Even so, Mashiro couldn't stop worrying about Augur, because this training process was far too risky for her, and she began to wonder if Augur could really endure it. Despite her worries for him, she knew perfectly well that Augur was no ordinary man. Having promised to cheer him on, Mashiro resolved to create snow continuously for 2 days without stopping. In this world, there exist spirits that are invisible to the naked eye. These spirits possess attributes such as water, wind, fire, earth, thunder, and light. When imbued with the corresponding magical power, they will transform into energy and create a phenomenon known as magic. However, in this world, no soul is compatible with Augur's magical power. In other words, he lacks magical aptitude. When Augur says this, people often misunderstand that he has no magical power at all. But in reality, he possesses magical powers. And it's a tremendous power inherited from the Verret family, something no one knows about. It seems that for spirits, Augur's magic is like poison. If Augur infuses his magical power into an opponent's spirit, he can prevent them from activating their spells. However, he was unable to use the skill in the match. Therefore, no matter how difficult it was, for 2 days and nights, Augur persevered, enduring all the pain to continue his training. Skip to the day before the match. Augur seemed to have grasped what he was looking for. Now, he can sense exactly when magic appears and disappears. With this skill, Augur was confident that he wouldn't lose to any mage, even the Prince of the Kingdom. The day of the final match finally arrived. Everyone was incredibly excited for this highly anticipated battle. As expected, everyone started placing bets on who would win and who would lose. And of course, most people believed that Augur had no chance against the prince. But is that really the truth? Among the crowd of spectators, Gordon Verret, Augur's father, was also present, along with Principal Floan. Gordon's appearance came as a complete surprise to Floan. He was still the same doting father he'd always been. But Floan couldn't deny that Gordon had every right to do so. Because Augur had achieved extraordinary accomplishments in a short period of time since enrolling at the academy. Furthermore, depending on the winner's requirements, Floan might need Gordon's consent, which is why she invited him here. However, Gordon looked more like a parent observing their child's class than a mere spectator. While everyone was eagerly awaiting the showdown between the two, in the waiting room for candidates, Karen seemed extremely worried. Despite her confidence in Augur's strength, she couldn't help but feel uneasy knowing this was a duel against the kingdom's prince. If Augur lost, the prince would undoubtedly make an outrageous demand. In contrast to Karen's tension, Augur appeared surprisingly calm. This made Karen wonder, how exactly was Augur planning to fight when he couldn't use magic? Instead of explaining everything to Karen, Augur simply reassured her that there was no need to worry, as he had prepared a countermeasure. Hearing that, Karen felt somewhat relieved, as if the tension in her heart had suddenly vanished. But now that Augur mentioned it, Karen couldn't help but ask him, if he won, what would he ask of the prince? Augur began to think and realized that he hadn't made a concrete decision yet. His goal was to get the prince to start from scratch with Karen, but it would be strange if he asked the prince to do so. Therefore, Augur decided to let Karen decide for herself what she wanted to do with Prince Arnia. Now that she's Augur's childhood friend, Karen surely hopes the prince will genuinely take an interest in her. With that in mind, for the first time in a long time, Augur asked Karen what her true desires were. This was the first time someone had asked about her personal thoughts, and this made Karen feel like she was doing something wrong by responding. However, her wish had existed for a long time, She just never dared to express it. With tears welling up in her eyes, Karen softly said that she only wanted to be with Augur forever. However, because he couldn't articulate this clearly, Augur thought she was talking about the prince. With that in mind, Augur promised Karen that after the match, her wish would still come true. With everything settled, the two entered the arena. As soon as they entered, cheers erupted everywhere. As always, almost all the girls in the academy were supporting Prince Arnia. Meanwhile, the boys, enraged by what the prince had done to them, sided with Augur, hoping he would avenge them. Prince Arnia was quite surprised to see Augur so popular with the boys. Augur quickly explained that it was because Arnia had made too many enemies of theirs. However, Augur still felt that their cheering was completely unnecessary. Before the match began, the referee instructed both players to put on their combat vests and gloves, but it seems Prince Arnia didn't want to wear his own robe. Instead, he wanted to wear Augur's robe, the white one. The referee quickly reminded them that this was impossible, as these battle vests were equipped with magical tools that would determine the winner. The vests were imbued with magic, so they could no longer be removed. After everything was sorted out, the match has officially begun. Prince Arnia attacked first, using his earth spirit. Everyone was quite surprised by Arnia's power. Even Augur didn't expect that Arnia's magic was of the earth element. However, it seems the prince has yet to reveal his true potential. Augur realizes that Arnia is concealing her power. Nevertheless, Augur has prepared a countermeasure capable of dealing with this type of magic. However, he didn't expect the prince to cast such a large-scale spell. With a calm demeanor, Arnia focused entirely on her incantation, completely ignoring Augur. Because this was something Augur had not anticipated, he couldn't move an inch because of the overwhelming tension inside him. But in the middle of the match, he suddenly recalled memories from his entire life. He had always remained loyal to the path of evil. He yearned to become the ultimate villain. He meticulously studied magic, honed his fighting skills, and never let his efforts falter. Therefore, no matter what, he will not give in to any opponent. Right now, in the match against the prince, Augur holds firm to that resolve. However, he felt he could kill the prince with just one punch. In reality, Augur probably felt less stressed and more disappointed. Besides Prince Arnia leaving him too much room to attack, Augur had actually expected a formidable opponent, but all he got was this man. With that in mind, Augur realized he could end the fight in a single blow. Although the prince continued to talk a lot, Augur eventually stated frankly that he could kill the prince with a single punch if he wanted to. Prince Arnia, feeling offended by Augur's statement, Arnia deliberately provoked him by saying that Augur was really boring, being the childhood friend of a failed transgender person like Karen. In fact, the prince even openly stated in front of everyone that Karen was just a money-making tool for him. And the only reason he kept her by his side was because Augur valued Karen very much. This made Augur inevitably feel angry at Arnia's words. As soon as Arnia finished concentrating her power, he launched everything at Augur. However, much to the prince's surprise, Augur can dodge all attacks, even when his eyes are closed. Shocked by Augur's abilities, Arnia couldn't believe she'd been knocked out with a single punch. Augur, still angry about Arnia's words, he kept punching him hard until the prince was knocked down. Because Arnia lost unexpectedly, his fans started to give up. Ultimately, Augur won the match. Just 23 minutes after the match began, the match between the prince and Augur ended, but Augur was disappointed that the prince was so weak. However, he had also achieved his goal. Augur's goal was to make the prince change and reconcile with Karen, thereby severing her ties, implement the harem system he had envisioned. However, surprisingly, this request came from Karen. Initially, Augur thought she would ask the prince to start over with her, but everyone was surprised when she asked the prince to cancel their engagement. Instead, she wanted to get engaged to Augur. Everything was confirmed immediately during the match, and it was the headmaster and Augur's father who handled all the official procedures. As people celebrated and rejoiced at this news, Augur was shocked and worried. Now, his plans for his hair and his future seemed impossible to achieve. This was such serious news for him that he fainted. After 3 hours of rest in the infirmary, Augur woke up to be greeted by Karen. And surprisingly, Karen looked even more glamorous than usual today,